The attic is where you put things you don't want to think about. That's why it's the last place your brain expects footsteps. I moved into a narrow cape with knee-wall crawlspaces and a single plywood walkway laid like a tongue down the middle of the attic. The first week, the thermostat started lying. Nights read warmer than they felt, then spiked to 78 at 3 a.m. even when I was asleep under 2 quilts. The app log showed manual adjustment at times I wasn't touching it. The first sound arrived as 3 soft contacts, long apart, as if a person were learning where to place boots on joists. It was 2:11 a.m. My refrigerator hummed. The ceiling returned a different hum from above, like breath in a paper bag. I lay still and tried to let my brain choose raccoons. I don't own raccoons. I do own a cheap ladder and a stubborn curiosity. At noon the next day, I pulled the attic string and shoved the panel up. Heat rolled down with the smell of dust that has opinions. I swept a phone light across the beams. The proof waited where proof always waits, where nobody looks unless they need a suitcase. In the fluff beside the plywood tongue ran prints, clean ovals where weight had pressed fiberglass flat. They zigzagged between rafters like a memory trying not to make noise. At the far end, near the gable vent, the insulation wore a hollow the size of 2 knees. Beside it sat a flattened water bottle, a wrapper, and the stub of a pencil shaved to nothing. I took a picture and climbed down faster than I meant to, the ladder ticking like it was counting. I called my neighbor Katie because she has a calm that makes dogs lie down. She came with a flashlight and said 2 sentences I didn't want to hear. Those are shoe prints, and they're fresh. We called the non-emergency line and waited on the porch. My phone buzzed with a thermostat notification. Manual change. Neither of us laughed. 2 officers arrived, boots making the kind of noise that declares itself. They went up with masks and gloves, asked me to stand clear, and came down with a face that didn't know which muscle to move first. Someone's been sitting up there, one said, and set a crumpled grocery list on my counter. It had my address written on top, then 5 items. Instant oatmeal, almond milk, apples, AA batteries, and razor. Next to the list was a key I didn't recognize, filed at the tip like someone had taught it a trick. The attic hatch had a new shine where fingers found a groove. The officer showed me dust displaced on the molding, the light smear of oil from a palm drawing the same path over and over. He listened to your house until it told him when you sleep, he said. We checked the cameras. I don't have any inside, but the doorbell does a good impression of one. At 2:07 a.m. the night before, the frame caught the attic hatch move a thumb's width and settle, enough to bleed air, not enough to show a face. The same minute, the thermostat log shows, to 72. Proof but not a name. The officers dusted the attic walkway with a little aluminum flake kit, then asked me to sleep elsewhere while they sat outside. I packed a bag with hands that didn't feel like mine. Katie made tea that I didn't drink. In the morning they knocked with the kind of news that lands like a tool on tile. They'd found a sleeping roll jammed behind the HVAC trunk, a toothbrush, and a prepaid flip phone with a dead battery. The number in its call log matched a missed call on my phone from no caller ID 2 nights earlier. Later, when the landlord changed the garage door lock, we learned a copy went missing during a roof repair last fall. The filed key on my counter wasn't for my front door. It was for the garage, which opens under the attic stairs. He had been letting himself into the space above my sleep to eat oatmeal and listen for the parts of my life I don't say out loud. People asked later how I knew he was really there and not just old house noises. I show them the photo of the prints through the insulation, my thermostat log, the hatch clip, the grocery list with my address in someone else's hand. None of it feels as loud as the simplest proof. The thin palm smear on the molding at the hatch, level with the place my breath touched when I looked up. I moved out after my lease, broke the plywood tongue into firewood, and told myself attics are for boxes again. The second story belongs to a duplex I rented for 3 months. The kind with an attic everybody swore was shared but sealed. My cat disagreed. Every night at 11 she sat under the hall hatch and stared like it was a TV. First came smells I couldn't name. Cold laundry, men's soap, a thin strand of cigarette that never made smoke. Then the tiniest tick from a vent above my bed. The noise drywall screws make when they learn a new weight. I dusted the hatch frame with flour and sprinkled baby powder on the first 3 rungs of the pull-down ladder, an internet trick that made me feel foolish until I checked it at dawn. A finger had dragged a lazy crescent through the flour. 2 heel prints curved the powder, naked and narrow, one with a nick by the arch. I set my phone on the island to time-lapse the haul. At 2:36 a.m. the video shows the hatch blink, lift, settle, and a rope of extension cord pay out. The plug end of the cord swung like a pendulum until it found my baseboard. In the last 2 seconds of the clip, pale fingers entered the frame at the hatch corner, felt along the trim for the outlet I used for the vacuum, and missed by an inch. The hatch breathed closed. The cord retreated like a snake being pulled by its tail. I didn't sleep the next night. At 11:30 I stood under the hatch and said aloud that I was calling my landlord and then the police. The house stayed theatrical. I texted the landlord anyway. Hatch moved on its own, have video, please call me. He wrote back at 7:10 a.m. like normal people live. I sent the clip. He arrived with a ladder, a painter's mask, and the kind of skepticism you inherit as a landlord. We pushed the panel up. A smell climbed down. Dry sweat and dryer sheets and a nickel of cigarette that never quite burned. 2 feet from the opening, the extension cord made a lazy S across the plywood tongue. Its female end disappeared into the knee wall on my side. Its male plug had faint rub marks on the prongs. We stopped and called the police because we wanted adults to be the ones to touch proof. They came quiet, like people who have said too many times, don't go up there alone. In the insulation, the same oval footmarks I'd photographed had multiplied and overlapped into a path. They ran from the hatch to the HVAC trunk and then sideways along the joists to a low sheetrock wall with a seam in it. One officer tested the seam. He gave with 2 fingers. He widened it to the width of a head and peered into the twin attic above the other half of the duplex. Shared but sealed, the landlord said weakly, like a prayer that had been lied to. The officers didn't crawl into the neighbor's side. They called for consent at the door, and when no one answered, they waited for a second car and a property manager with a master. When the second door opened, the neighbor blinked at us. Embarrassed and suddenly alert about a space he'd been promised didn't connect. We all went up from his side. The living area in the V above our 2 ceilings wasn't a nest. It was a study. A camp pad hid behind the duct. A crate of instant noodles, 3 apples gone soft, 2 empty oatmeal cups, and a power strip sat on a board laid across joists. The extension cord from my outlet plugged into the strip. A phone charger sprouted from it. A mirror from a makeup compact was duct-taped at an angle above the hall register, so that if you put your eye to a certain slit in the vent cover you could see a slice of my front door. A tiny hole had been drilled in the drywall above my bedroom vent. Not enough to see through, just enough to breathe and listen. On a scrap of cardboard, someone had written a list like the back of a playbill. 11 o'clock water, 11:20 shower, 12:15 TV, 2:30 quiet, 6:40 alarm. Below it, Tuesday late, studio. The landlord looked at me and I looked at the neighbor and we both swallowed the quiet part. My schedule lived in someone else's handwriting. The officers bagged the charger, the compact, the ramen wrappers, the extension cord. They dusted the beam by the seam for prints and pulled one partial big enough to be worth a call. They found a pinched-off cigarette but caught in a spider web by the gable vent. On the camp pad sat a flattened pack of gum and a single AA battery. In a nook under the hip of the roof they found a prepaid phone dead enough to be humble. Its last text was a string of numbers, mine, and a single word, home. He wasn't there. The gable vent screen had a corner popped and a scrape down the face where someone dropped to the tiny back porch roof and hopped to the yard. The neighbor's Ring doorbell had recorded a shadow at 5:01 a.m. More fog than person. The proof stayed. The person left because proof had arrived. We changed locks. The landlord paid for a real fire stop and a solid wall. The officer handed me a foil bag with the white disc that had made my cat sit like a statue. He'd found it glued under the lip of the hall table, the kind of flattery that pretends to be clever. I keep the bag in a drawer to remind me that attics aren't myths. They're rooms. You shouldn't have to say that out loud to believe it. I say it anyway. I used to think marbles rolling in the attic was the house teaching you it was old. The third story made me hate that sentence. I'd moved into a rented foursquare while waiting for a closing that took forever. The place had stairs that bit my feet and an attic door in the hall that was painted shut at the edges. The first week I heard marbles. Not many. One or two rolling a short distance and stopping, just enough to make you imagine a boy on a slanted floor. It happened at 3 p.m. once when I was on a work call. It happened at 1:12 a.m. twice in a minute like a child answered a dare. Old houses, I told myself. Pipes lie. Squirrels teach your ceiling to talk. Then a kitchen knife I never use went missing. Then a tape measure. Then a jar of quarters. Small, dumb gravity, I thought. I opened cabinets like the answer might have moved while I blinked. Saturday morning the inspector for my future house came by as a favor to look at a loose railing. He saw me chewing my lip at the hall and asked if anything else needed eyes. I said stupidly, "Do you believe in marbles?" He smiled the way people who know the trick smile. He went to his truck and came back with a thermal camera. We stood under the attic door and watched the little screen show our ceiling as a puzzle of blues and oranges. He traced the joists and the duct and then paused over a rectangle of slightly warmer air 3 feet from the hatch. "That's a void," he said. "Or a critter. Or a person who left their heat where heat shouldn't be." He rapped the plaster. It answered with a thud and then a lighter knock like something rubbing on wood. He looked at me and said gently, "Call someone who wears a badge." Then he stood in my kitchen until they arrived because people who have lived around problems know which ones you shouldn't meet alone. 2 officers later, the attic door paint line split under a utility knife. They heaved it up and we climbed behind them. It looked like 1,000 old attics. A walkway to nowhere, pink insulation like a failed cake, a smell of dry heat and mouse. On the far side, between 2 rafters, a board laid loosely across joists made a little stage. On the stage sat my tape measure and my jar of quarters, light by $30, next to a folded blanket that didn't belong to me. On a nail driven into a beam, someone had hung a ring of keys with a rubber tag from the pizza place 3 blocks away. On a scrap of 2x4, indents marked tally marks in sets of 5. In the insulation, 2 little cupped hollows in a row held a line of steel balls that looked like marbles until light woke them up. Ball bearings, arranged as if someone had been rolling them in their palm to make them sound like a child's toy. In the gable vent screen sat a dime stuck upright in the mesh, like a coin in a trick. The proof that made me sit on the top step was smaller. Above the bathroom, a piece of HVAC flex duct had a zip tie replaced with twine. At the tie, a hole the size of a dime had been burned through the plastic with a lighter. If you put your ear to it from above, it sat an inch over the bathroom fan grill. If you put your ear to it from below, it was a hum you blame on old houses until you can't. We didn't find a person that day either. We did find that the back porch roof had footprints in pollen, small and careful, leading to a window someone had tried like they were going to visit and then decided not to. The landlady arrived soft and furious, holding a pack of old keys like they were snakes. One was stamped garage in steel letters. It fit the padlock on the outside stair to the attic storage door. Inside the door frame, someone had filed the latch plate just enough to let a credit card do the rest. I put a trail camera up there anyway because I needed to be the one who watched it be empty. It wasn't. The second night, at 12:42 a.m., the infrared caught a head and shoulder rising briefly into the frame at the far end of the walkway, then dropping. The face was round under a hood, eyes half closed against the red. A smear of someone who belonged to no one. 30 seconds later, the bathroom fan in the hall bath hummed to life. The camera recorded the bearing balls shivering in their cups like a tiny chorus that didn't know how to stop once someone wounded them. The officers came back and sat on my steps again, and we did the same slow tour. This time they pulled the bearing cups into an evidence bag and photographed the tally marks and the burned duct. The landlady replaced the garage hasp and left with a jaw like a door. I slept 2 nights with a chair under the attic door because ritual matters, and then I slept somewhere else while the closing finished. People who told me it was squirrels got quieter when I showed them the trail cam clip and the ball bearings lined in a row like patience you could hold. The attic was where I'd put things I didn't want to think about. The proof was where I couldn't not.